Okay, so you may have noticed that the title is family question mark. That's because for myself, and I might contend that for everybody, the word family is a really loaded word. I think when we hear that word, we can think of perhaps our family of origin. Maybe we're thinking of our current family. Maybe we're thinking of the family that we desire to have. Since that is such a loaded word, for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to try to speak. I'm going to try and maybe detach the image from those specific people or circumstances that may be on your mind. And let's just paint the picture of a house as the illustration for family. And this kind of can help us separate it maybe from the trenches of the specific things. So, with that being said, um, what is the ideal family or house or life? Um, the stereotypical American dream used to paint a picture of maybe a house, white picket fence, 2.5 children. Nowadays, that's shifting a lot with the is it an invention of fur babies where maybe the ideal family is I've heard the phrase a lot, my chosen family. You hear about again people having maybe their partner of the moment and a couple pets. There's a lot of mobility. I had talked about the image of a house. That's not really how things work as much. Your home may be a van that you travel in, or just live in. So um, the ideal could be different for a lot of us, but I know that um, for many of us, perhaps certainly all of us, we're thinking about who's in that house. What does it look like? Certainly, comfort, pleasure, joy, laughter, good food. All of these things may be part of our ideal vision. Um, However, I'm going to talk about perhaps what is a more accurate way to understand this house rather than your aspirational idea, maybe what's really happening. Okay, so I have interviewed for the purposes of making this talk awesome. Uh, I interviewed a Green Beret about what the day of disaster might possibly look like for a modern American. Okay, so China has 5 airborne drones for every one airborne drone that America has. So if you were imagining an aerial attack, it would be rapid and it would be decisive, and the our little drones wouldn't stand much of a chance, just from the sheer numbers perspective. But it would be instant, and in an age of rapid information sharing, we would probably know right away. Um, Now, in contrast to that, in the ancient times, there are two ancient empires. We're going to think about Babylon, and we're going to think of the fall of the city of Constantinople. Um, so, when your city was being attacked by a foreign invasion troop, first there would be rumors. You would hear a friend of a friend of a so and so of a relative, and things might be kind of wild. Some of the rumors about the ancient Persian fleet was that they had so many arrows that they would darken the sky. And so you'd hear things like that, and you'd go, I mean, that's a lot of arrows. But next, refugees would start trickling in. And they would be people who were fleeing from a battle that had already happened, or they were trying to get out in advance of the incoming troops. And the next step would probably be you would see dust on the horizon, because this would be a large land-bound or maybe ocean-bound troop. And you would see, especially if they're land-bound, you'd see dust or disturbances on the horizon. Um, and then finally, and then you'd start hearing them. Once you were hearing the noises of footsteps and the machines and the animals coming in, that's when the terror would set in. Um, so when we have, again, from history, we have different ways that ancient kings handled the terror of, the all of the earlier stuff is all done, and now the troops are sitting outside the gate of your city, and you know that your city's probably going to fall. Um, so King One, his name was Belshazzar. He was the last king of Babylon, and they had a walled city, but there was a river that ran through it. And so because they had a walled city and there's a river through it, they're like, we can last all day. Or, well, not all day. They thought they could last for years when the surrounding troops were around. But the enemies dried up the river, and they actually diverted it. And so one day they would have woken up and there'd be no water. And then they sent troops in the riverbed. That's how they were able to penetrate the city. And so the water would be gone, you'd be surrounded. And what this king did, when the water was gone and he knew that it was the end, he made for himself an incredibly lavish feast. He got out the very best of the food, the very best of the wine, and the very best of the women. And he got together the wealthiest people in his world, and they had, again, the most lavish, indulgent feast you could imagine. And then at dawn, he was dead. In When Constantinople was surrounded by the Islamic hordes of people, so they also had a pretty secure city. Their biggest advantage was water, and they had a big chain that laid across the moat. Well, overnight, their opponents, the siege had gone on for a little while. The siege, where the city's surrounded and trapped, it had gone on a while, and they're like, yeah, we're probably going to be fine. Well, the enemies, what they did is on land, they built a bridge to be able to pull the boat up to get it past the chain in the harbor. And so, same thing as for Babylon, they would have all of a sudden realized, oh no, they're building differently, they're moving differently, and you would have seen the war boats coming up on land. The boats were pulled up overnight, and so the last emperor of Constantinople, his name was Constantine, and he took communion at the biggest temple in the land. And so he took a last communion. And then at dawn, he rode out and was decapitated in the gates of the city with the fall of the city. So you may be wondering why are we talking about all of this? Well, I would say that for all of us, our lives are a lot more like a city under siege than they are a nice little white picket fence house where we can enjoy pleasure, the ideal pleasures and comfort and people. That is our perhaps the vision that we're painting for our life, perhaps the vision that our culture is saying, go get this. I think the illustration of a household or a city that's under siege and that you're going to lose is a lot more accurate, because all of us face suffering and all of us must ultimately face death. And so even if you are able to accrue many, many material comforts and have the best of the wine and the best of the food, your body is aging, and even as you try and push suffering and hardship away from you, it is still coming. So how do we build a house in light of that? How do we have relationships with other people in light of this? That's going to be what we talk about. So, with the illustration of a city or house that's under attack, I'm going to talk about one of the images that the Bible uses to talk about how we build our lives is there's a house that is built on, well, I'm going to read you the passage. This is from the book of Matthew. So Jesus is talking to people. Um, so this is the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So, we're going to be talking about what does it look like to have a house built on an unsteady foundation, and then we're going to get to practically what does it look like to build a house on a foundation that will last. All right, so in this first part one, we're going to talk about an identity that's built on a couple of things that are bad foundations. Okay, so bad philosophy, a word that we're going to call idols, and lies. And those two things are pretty similar. So first point is bad philosophy, and I'm actually going to direct you to, if you haven't seen it already, I did a talk about what it's like to be making disciples, what it's like to be following Jesus in our current times. So check out the link to it. I get really into some of the philosophy and even some of the cultural trends that are going on right now, like the invention of the phone, the impact of pornography, and especially how all of this is built on a kind of philosophy that really, really emphasizes self, the individual experience, and especially the kind of self thinking that goes, my needs are the most important, me before you. Um, and that's in contrast to the Christian philosophy, which says, of course, God's commandments, but also the needs of the other before the needs of myself. And all of that is under God's commandments and direction. And so, just because somebody has a need doesn't mean that it's obedient to God, doesn't mean that it's pleasing in his sight. So to be clear, that's not just saying that self-sacrifice is always what we do. It must be rooted in a biblical understanding of what are the right ways that people ought to interact with each other. So check that out for the kind of philosophy that could be impacting a house built on sand. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about idols. Okay, idols is kind of that can be a bit of a confusing word. In the olden sense of the word, it was the idea that people would have, it would actually be a physical thing that you would like worship. Okay, so in the Bible, it talks about like you get a piece of wood, you carve it to look like something really cool, and then you pray to it. And then the other part of the wood you'd throw in the fire. God's like, is that smart? Probably not. But I would, well, I think the picture that's painting is something that's actually a lot more deep set. So when we're thinking about idols, which you can think of that as something that has a really central place in your life, so much so that you like move everything around to accommodate for it. So we have surface idols and we have deep idols. All right. Now, here's what this looks like. A surface idol could be something that's super, super important to people. And you can kind of sense that something could be going on where there's conflict. Okay. So, a surface idol, an example of this is money. Let's say we have, remember the illustration of a household. We have a husband and a wife, and they're really, really fighting about money. Um, the wife, perhaps, is someone who, I'm going to use myself as an example. Um, I really, really value image. Okay. I value image and influence. And so when I spend money, first of all, I am prone to either spend money or desire to spend money. And when I do those things, well, let's get this a little more hypothetical. The woman, for example, is going to spend money on things which make herself look good. Okay, that could be clothing, that could be eating a certain type of food, maybe driving a certain type of vehicle. She's going to do things that are, again, make her look like someone of influence and affluence. Well, what if her husband is somebody who values stability? All right, so he's going to want to spend money, actually on things that look like not spending at all. So maybe he's desirous of a 401k savings account, a large bank account, investments for the future. Well, this can look really sticky because here's the woman, the wife in this illustration is wanting to spend money on, say, clothing, and he's wanting to save money. Well, both of them have this surface thing that they're fighting about, and it may cause a fair amount of struggle and conflict. But her desire is for power. His heart desire may be for control. Now, and safety. Both of them could be spending every penny they've got. He's spending money by not spending money. She's spending money in a way that seems to be more evident. But they're still both feeding everything they have towards this deeper desire in their hearts. So that illustration is to show that we may have a surface idol that could be money, that could be sex, like sex being the physical acts that we are doing with our bodies. So it could be money, it could be sex, it could look like, again, children. So all of these things, you could even have, a beloved pet, a beloved hobby. So these are surface idols. It's almost like a presenting problem. But then there tend to be really about four deep idols that everybody's operating from a place of. And those are the desire for power, the desire for control, the desire for approval, or the desire for comfort. Everybody tends to have one of those, whether it's power, control, influence, and or not, sorry, not influence, but approval, uh, and then comfort. Everyone tends to have one of those, that the desire for it is the most dominant and pushing thing that's inspiring your actions. And we have these conflicts with each other when our deep desires are butting heads against the deep desires of somebody else, when it seems like that deep thing that we crave above all else seems to be under attack. Ways that you can troubleshoot, do I have one of these things in my heart, is look to areas of your life where perhaps you have a reaction that is a reaction to an event or a person that's outside the parameters of normal. So everybody, well, many people who have healthy attached relationships, you may be devastated at the loss of a friendship or a bad breakup. But if you can't eat and can't sleep for 6 months because of the after effects of this lost relationship, Well, then you can begin to ask some questions. If you, nobody enjoys failing a test or having a work project go poorly, but if you're suicidal as a result of that, and not just the immediate, oh, I'm just devastated, but if there's this ongoing, you can't pull yourself together, kind of despair that starts coming into play, that's a great time to examine, pray, ask questions, begin to start looking, um, what's under there. Another little troubleshooting trick to help detect what are some of those what are some of those deep desires or idols in your heart is to think about your nightmares, okay? And that's speaking figuratively or literally, but what are the things that you are most afraid of? So somebody who most craves power may most fear humiliation. Um, Somebody who most craves um, affection and approval, they most fear rejection. So think through what are some of the things, and you could even see this like if your biggest fear is something like um, sickness. Well, but what's is it the discomfort of sickness or is it the unpredictability where you had a certain schedule and all of a sudden a sickness throws that into chaos? So start asking yourself, where are the areas that I'm seeing a disproportionate reaction, and what are my worst fears? What are my nightmares? Um, the next and final thing that we're going to talk about with what are the reasons that we're seeing some shaky, what are some of the other shaky foundations to build a home on? Um, Another point is lies. Okay. Lies are really, really tricky because a good lie probably has a little bit of truth in it, and you probably don't think it's a lie. So, I had a friend who was sitting in a group of other people, and they very earnestly they looked at him and they said, "What are your blind spots?" And he just looked at them and said, "Huh?" Because the point of a blind spot is you can't see it. And once again, it's like this with a good lie. That's something that's planted deep in your heart, that affects perhaps everything that you do. But it seems very true to you. Um, so just like with discovering idols, to detect a lie, one little trick is to ask people who are close to you. You can even just directly say, "Do you see things that I'm thinking, things that I'm speaking about, ways that I operate that are inaccurate to reality?" Um, you can, again, there are certain people who will know you, love you, and be gentle to you. I maybe wouldn't advise asking just everybody because this stuff does deal with your heart and it can be really scary to talk about it. You could even ask, what are some of my weaknesses and just see where are you reacting strongly? What are you afraid of people saying? So you can to find some lies in your heart, you can talk about things, have people who know you very, very closely. And once again, look at areas of your life where you're seeing disproportionate reactions. The illustration of, let's say that there has been a big conflict in uh, your life. Let's say a conflict with parent. Well, if there's the lie that's in your heart that says, nobody could really know me for who I am, people would abandon me if they really knew what was going on inside. Well, your parent, someone who's in the parent role, tends to know their child, especially if it's a child that's living in their home, very, very closely. And so the people who are inside your household are going to maybe come a lot closer to kicking at that lie. So if your parent says something like, "Oh, your shoes don't match with your pants," and then you go, You never loved me. While that's a bit of a silly example, if the lie in your heart is the way that I am is unacceptable, when you make a choice like how to get dressed and you get just a little bit of criticism, you can just explode because that's kicking at that lie of what I bring to the table, what I bring into this family isn't enough. And then you just can't handle the criticism or the conflict. So, ask people who are close to you about your words and about your thoughts. And then, second of all, look for disproportionate reactions or and look where there's conflict in your life. Those are good ways to troubleshoot some lies. Our families are the pressure points to expose our weak foundation. So, my family bought a foreclosed home. It's actually this home that I'm filming in right now. It looked good from the outside, but the moment that people began to walk around inside of it, the problems became evident. To switch metaphors, it's like a bridge. Let's say that someone has built a bridge, but there are teeny tiny hairline fractures that make the structure unstable. Family is like driving a huge 10-ton truck across this bridge, or to go back to the other metaphor, it's like bringing a bunch of stomping people into this foreclosed home with a bad floor. And that's without the external threats that we talked about from the beginning. The Christian philosophy believes that people are under attack from we call it the world, the flesh, which is some of those idols and desires in our hearts, and then we believe in the devil, who is a spiritual being who hates God and His people. And so those are both the attacking points inside and outside. So do you feel like your heart is being broken over and over again? Are you mad all the time? Is life in your home so dark that you don't even want to get out of bed, or that you cannot get out of bed without medicine? So those are the problem. And next, I want to talk to you about the resources of an identity rooted in Jesus. So to go back to the passage that I began with, Jesus says, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and then does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock." So again, everyone who hears these words and then does them. Another pertinent passage is, "Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit." So, what this is talking about is, if you are a follower of Jesus, you're no longer this totally free, separate individual. You're part of a new household. It's not built on you, nor the lies in your heart or home of origin. It is not another big thing is it's not built on your doing, your achievement, your GPA, your work ethic. It is built on a different story. It's the story of Jesus, who's a man who, the perfect man, who came to live, die, and rise again for sinners. And now Jesus says that his followers are being rebuilt in his image. Okay, so to say, don't build your house on these lies, do build your house on Jesus. That sounds perhaps nice, but very practically, you could be wondering, what does this look like? I don't know what that looks like. I am going to give you a personal story for myself, but this isn't a prescription for you. This is a description to maybe help you think about, what could this look like for you? What does this look like for you? So for myself, you know a little bit about maybe some of the, just from listening to me in theory, you'll know about some of the, perhaps idols, the desire for power, the desire for approval. I think the deepest, maybe pain point or desire in my heart is it has to do with um, the image of people sitting around a table. Okay, so let's say you cook and just the act of cooking. Think about love. Think about preparation. Think of time. Think of the giving and the service. Let's think of a feast, a rotisserie chicken, say, that is on the table. And there's a group of people gathered around that. For me, again, this is personal. I have had several people in my heart that are gathered around that table. I'm the second born of a family with 7 children. I have had very, very close, beloved friends, and friends who are like minded with me in the faith in my church. Some of these friends have lived in my home with my husband and I. We have had very, very close community in our church. So I have, one group of people around my table involves like my big family. Another is the friends who have been like family and like siblings and even parents in my life. And then, of course, the other group is, well, not of course, but the other group is my immediate household who does live in this home with me. There's my husband, and I have 4 children who are very, very precious to me. Um, Now, so let's back to that picture of family, okay, a group of beloved people sitting around the table. Well, what if we take that chicken and we've prepared the meal, we have the chicken, we've gathered the people. What if we just left the chicken for 1 hour? Well, I mean, it'd be cold. Maybe it'd be kind of lukewarm. You could kind of eat it and be polite because family question mark. So you have this chicken. Let it sit for an hour. Well, it's going to be a little cold. Let it sit for a day. Foodborne illness there's sometimes some flies in my house in the summertime, so the flies are buzzing. We're maybe starting to be concerned about foodborne illness. What if we leave that chicken for a week? Now it's going to smell. Foodborne illness, it may start, the longer this thing's in the air, it may start being unsafe to even be in the same room or house as it. Now, unfortunately, like I was saying about perhaps one of the best pictures of our life being a house or a city that's under attack, um, what if we looked at those people who are around that table? My personal experience, when I made a photo book I make photo books every year to commemorate what's happened over the time. I gather together pictures that I store digitally and I put them into a like print book and then I put it on a shelf. Um, I went back and I made a book. This year that I'm speaking is 2023. I made a book from 2015 and before. Um, and all of the people who are in that book, all of these pictures of people are people who are no longer gathered around my table. Some of those people have moved away. Some of those people, there has been an immense amount of conflict and personal rejection. Um, uh, there has been distance, again, due to separation, conflict, and just time, people moving separate ways, having separate interests. And so that's after 8 years, what it looks like around my table. But if I think to the future, um, people who even in my household right now, if you have that picture of the chicken, what happens after an hour, after a day, after a week? What happens to people after 8 years, after 10 years, after 20, 30, 40 years? It's going to be death that takes people away. It's going to be sickness. It's going to be, again, conflict. And that, both the years in the past where that story has quite literally played out, and when I look ahead to the future, with the people who I love the most right now, anticipating them leaving that table, both literally and metaphorically, there is just so much sorrow, fear, anger that is a pretty prevalent part of my heart's, I don't know, conversation, yearning, landscape. That thought grieves me, and I have wept and been angry and been confused over. That's been part of the impetus, even for this whole talk. Again, to get personal with it. So that's my journey of perhaps a house built on this desire for connection, for family, for community. But what if I'm trying to take this major pain point and then build it on Christ? Well, there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, like God, when people in the Bible are grieving, at one point, one of the men who lost the most in probably the history of the world, he said, God gives and God takes away. And blessed is his name. And will I receive the good things from his hand and not the hard things? So seeing things not as, I must cling to this, I must fight for these people, I must get it back, I must restore, I must hound and guilt and harass, but rather to see the time and the people as a gift to hold with open hands. That's one thing that I have used on my heart, or that God's used on my heart. Another thing is, there are many passages that talk about how God thinks of his people. And one of the things that's been most personal to me has been, it's in Psalm 27. In verse 10, it says, "For my father and mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in." So when God speaks to us, he talks about, remember I used the illustration of a kid who's maybe not wearing the right clothing and gets so mad because what the child needs is the love of this person very close to them. Like, God uses family language. He uses the language. I gave you an example of parent to child. Jesus uses, and God himself, they use the language over and over and over again of marriage. And so father to children, marriage, there's some sibling language in the Bible with Jesus painted as the true older brother for us. So for all of the pain and confusion about these dear friendships and family relationships, I have personally seen with verses like this how God has promises that go out and they are not lies, and they don't return void to people's hearts. I have seen in the moments when the people who I loved the most couldn't be there for me, God has been there for me, in ways that are very dear and personal. So I tell you all of that not to say, you have a problem, put on this solution, but to challenge you that when we say, build an identity on Christ, first, do look to God's word. That is a help, that is a tool. Just like what I read, there's great riches and comfort to be found in it, for us. But I would encourage you to pray about it. What are ways that you're seeing some of the greatest hurt and conflict in your life? And what would it look like to trust, to pray, to cast that on Jesus and to see him as the foundation rather than this huge desire or pain point? Okay, so we've talked about kind of the rough foundation, and then we've talked about the house built on the good foundation. But you may be thinking, family question mark? So what? So we've talked about building the house. I want to move to building the house on a foundation. Okay. And we've established there's bad foundation, good foundation, which is I'm going to talk about what does a house look like when it's standing on a Christian foundation. That is Jesus Christ himself as the living cornerstone. So Jesus and his teachings as depicted in the Bible. So what does that even mean? You may still be wondering. I have 2 points for you. These are a little bit more practical. A household built on Christ is stable. It stands on vows. That's point one. And then my point two is going to be we're going to talk about how a household built on Christ cares for the vulnerable. So, first of all, a household built on Christ is stable, it stands on vows. Now, the most clear way, because these vows are, well, there's actually a couple things. When somebody comes into the church, they may have a time of, they may be raised in a Christian home, they may believe in Jesus and follow Jesus, or they may be new to it and kind of figuring things out. Either way, one of the first steps of the faith and the life of a Christian in the church is a public vow during the act of baptism. We stand up and we confess that we believe in Jesus, that he's washed us of our sins. And then in community, we are in the church community and under the authority of our church leaders, we're baptized. That's a public vow. And another example of a vow is a wedding vow. God takes our vows very seriously. In parts of the Bible, it speaks against several different parts. It speaks about how divorce is not something that God endorses. So the reason for this is, you can use the picture of vows. Think of it as we've already have our foundation. Vows are working as the walls and the roof. And this is the book, this is Timothy Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage. And he quotes a man named Smedes. So here are two passages. Passage one, and again, this is Smedes speaking. And this is a quote, when I married my wife, I had hardly a smidgen of sense for what I was getting into with her. How could I know how much she would change over 25 years? How could I know how much I would change? My wife has lived with at least 5 different men since we were wed, and each of the 5 has been me. The connecting link with my old self has always been the memory of the name I took on back there. I am he who will be there with you. When we slough off that name, lose that identity, we can hardly find ourselves again. And then to continue, when I make a promise, I bear witness that my future with you is not locked into a bionic beam by which I was stuck with the faithful combinations of X's and Y's in the hand I was dealt out of my parents' genetic deck. When I make a promise, I testify that I was not routed along some unalterable itinerary by the psychic conditioning visited on me by my slightly wacky parents. When I make a promise, I declare that my future with people who depend on me is not predetermined by the mixed up culture of my tender years. I am not fated. I am not determined. I am not a lump of human dough whipped into shape by the contingent reinforcement and adversive conditioning of my past. I know as well as the next person that I cannot create my life anew. I'm well aware that much of what I am and what I do is a gift or a curse from my past. But when I make a promise to anyone, I rise above all the conditioning that limits me. No German Shepherd has ever promised to be there with me. No home computer ever promised to be a loyal help. Only a person can make a promise. And when he does, he is most free. So what he's saying there is, and this kind of goes back to some of the maybe lies or the idols that are kind of working in our hearts. all of us have conditioning that kind of shapes us. So, our genetics, our family of origin, our culture, um, these are all things, our circumstance, events, these are all things that influence our personality. But when somebody makes a vow, they are saying, they are shaping themselves. And shaping their future. And that is a massive thing. And when you um, don't follow through with those vows, it unravels your very selfhood and the fabric of the community that's around you. So my final thing about a household that is built on Christ is that it can be a place that cares for the vulnerable. So just like with my other point about a household built on Christ stands on vows, is built by vows. Don't think of just a actual household, man and women and children, but you can think of both that, a man and a woman and children, or you can think of the church, the group of people who worship God, who are gathered together under leadership that is submissive to the Lord and performs sacraments like baptism, making those vows. Um, these ought to be places where vulnerable people are encouraged to thrive. So, children, of course, are very vulnerable. Who could be more vulnerable than a little baby in the mother's stomach, a fetus in the mother's stomach? They need everything to be alive. They're very fragile, and a baby is very fragile. We are encouraged to be people who, if we are married and if we are able to, we're encouraged to raise up children, to teach children how to follow the Lord and to have this stable home built on vows that is a place where children can thrive. Um, Likewise, elderly, the young, the mentally ill, the widows, and single people. These are all the foreigners. These are all historically very, very vulnerable and sometimes even just hated and despised groups of people. Um, Tom Holland and the historian, not the actor, okay? The historian Tom Holland does a really great job talking about this in his book Dominion. He talks about how historically the church has built the philosophy which values the vulnerable and doesn't just value them, but makes things like hospitals and orphanages to care for them. So this may look different for people depending on whether or not they're married or single, but the household built on Christ will care for the vulnerable. Um, so, in conclusion, I would like to encourage you to think about the words of this song. In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when strivings cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. Build a family on that.